next part, we're going to have to change our notes a little bit, because the way these are normally thought about, we normally think of this as being as the form of x minus h, which will make everything actually backwards. Okay? So, horizontal translations are always inside parentheses. And this is what's going to make them tricky. Okay? They say the normal form is x minus h. I want you to understand that this is how we normally think of it, but for now I want you to change that to a plus sign. Okay? X plus h squared is the graph of f of x equals x squared translated horizontally. And if h is greater than 0, so if we add h, so if you add, here's where it gets a little tricky. I want you to cross out right, and I want you to put left. Because when you're inside parentheses, you always do the opposite of what makes sense. So normally when we add, we go to the right. Now we're going to add and we're going to go to the left because we're inside parentheses. Okay? And I want you to look at these parentheses and say, you sneaky parentheses, you will not trick me. Okay? Because this is a super common mistake. When we're outside parentheses, we do what makes sense. Add, go up, subtract, go down. When we're inside parentheses, you're going to do the opposite of what actually makes sense. So what you're going to do, and you go ahead and cross those out because we're switching this a little bit. When you add inside the parentheses, you're going to go to the left. And then if you would subtract, and go ahead and change this one to the right, if you subtract inside parentheses, you're going to move that far to the right. So add goes to the left, subtract goes to the right. And remember, these are those sneaky parentheses with quadratic functions. They just want to do the opposite of what actually makes sense. Okay, do not be tricked by this. They are the opposite of what you think. They are the opposite of what makes sense when they are inside parentheses. So describe how each graph of the function is related to the graph. Well, look, we have minus x minus 2 inside parentheses squared. So you can even see my red graph is my new graph. Well, what did we do when we subtracted 2 inside parentheses? Well, you might want to say, okay, we subtracted 2, we go 2 to the left. Wrong. Remember, you do the opposite of what makes sense. So subtracting 2 doesn't mean you go 2 to the left. It means the graph moved 2 units to the right. And then looking here, we have x plus 1. So we're adding 1 inside parentheses. And then we're going to square it. Adding 1 inside parentheses means it's going to be left or right. And since we're adding 1 inside parentheses, these are those sneaky parentheses. They want you to do the opposite of what actually makes sense. So instead of moving 1 to the right, which makes sense to me, we actually move 1 to the left. So the graph moved 1 unit to the left. Remember, outside parentheses makes sense. Inside parentheses is backwards.